At 74, with a lifetime of legendary hits, shattered marriages, and a spotlight that never quite dimmed, Phil Collins has finally revealed the truth he's carried for decades. It's not about the fame, the fortune, or even the heartbreak, it's about a woman. One he married. One he betrayed. And one he never stopped loving. In a moment of rare vulnerability, the music icon confessed what fans never expected, that the greatest love of his life wasn't just written into his songs, it was written into his silence. Was it guilt? Regret? Or a love story too complicated for its time? The answer might break your heart. Let's rewind to where it all began and uncover the woman who shaped the soul of Phil Collins' most unforgettable music. His lyrics cut deep. His drumming once rattled the walls of sold-out stadiums. As the voice of Genesis and a solo legend in his own right, Phil Collins delivered timeless hits like In the Air Tonight, Against All Odds, and Another Day in Paradise. But behind the fame, the awards, and the global spotlight was a story far more intimate, a story about the woman who quietly shaped the man behind the music. Long before Genesis topped charts, Phil was just a teenager in London, with a head full of rhythms and a heart quietly falling for a girl named Andrea Bertorelli. They met in drama class at just 11 years old, two kids drawn together by shared passions and easy conversation. But life, as it so often does, had other plans. Andrea's family moved to Canada, and the connection was lost. Years went by. Phil's rise to fame began. He joined Genesis in 1970, and by 1975, after Peter Gabriel's departure, he stepped into the lead vocalist role. But through all of it, the rehearsals, the tours, the madness, Andrea's memory never quite faded. He had become the face of a band destined for rock legend status. But even as Phil Collins stood in the spotlight, filling arenas and climbing charts, a part of him still felt unfinished. Then, in a twist worthy of a love song, fate stepped in. During a North American tour with Genesis in the mid-1970s, Collins reconnected with Andrea Bertorelli in Vancouver. They hadn't seen each other in years, but the spark was instant. What began as a simple reunion quickly turned into something far more powerful. The childhood friends fell in love all over again. In 1975, Phil and Andrea were married, and for a brief, shining moment, it seemed like every piece of his life had finally come together. Andrea had a young daughter, Jolie, from a previous relationship, and Phil embraced her as his own, stepping into fatherhood with pride and devotion. A year later, they welcomed their son Simon, and the family felt complete. But as Genesis skyrocketed to fame, Collins was constantly touring or locked in the studio. The distance began to wear on Andrea, and behind the scenes, their love story was quietly being tested. She talked about feeling alone and ignored and having a hard time keeping up a relationship with someone who wasn't home very often. The success that had brought them together was now tearing them apart. The tension grew. Collins tried to balance his career with family life, but it was too much for him. He started writing songs about his heartbreak, frustration, and guilt, which became hits for millions of people. Songs like Please Don't Ask and Misunderstanding weren't just lyrics, they were diary entries of a marriage in trouble by the 1980s. Collins and Andrea got divorced after 5 years of marriage. It was a painful end to what had once been a beautiful story of young love found again. The divorce was a turning point in Collins's life, both emotionally and creatively. After the divorce, Collins had one of the most productive and emotionally raw times of his career. His first solo album, Face Value, released in 1981, was full of sadness and longing. The lead single, In the Air Tonight, became a huge hit and is still thought of as one of the most haunting breakup songs of all time. Heartbroken enough that it affected his music, it changed him forever. Let's look at how he tried to move on and rebuild his life after his second marriage and heartbreak. The next part of his story began with a new woman, Jill Tavelman, an American who would become his second wife. Phil met Jill in the early 1980s, and unlike his other relationships, she wasn't from the music business. She was quiet, reserved, and elegant, which seemed to balance Phil's intense, fast-paced lifestyle for a while. Collins finally got married to Jill in 1984, and the next few years gave him a taste of the family life he had always wanted but had trouble keeping up. 5 years into their marriage, in 1989, Phil and Jill had a daughter named Lily Collins, who would later become a famous actress and star of the Netflix show Emily. For Phil, Lily's birth was one of the happiest times in an otherwise difficult life. He was thrilled to be a father again, and for a while the family lived a quiet life in. Collins' career was at a new high point, his albums were at the top of the charts, and he was touring the world. In 1992, Genesis went on another world tour that would put Collins in dangerous emotional territory. During this tour, Collins reconnected with Lavinia Lang, an old classmate and ex-girlfriend from Barbara Speake Stage School. Even though he was married to Jill, he rekindled the flame with Lavinia and the two started an affair, which he later admitted to hurtful actions. According to interviews and his autobiography, Phil Collins admitted that he and Jill had 2 separate affairs during this time. The affair with Lavinia wasn't just a fling, it was a sign that something deeper was broken. Phil admitted that he had fallen out of love with Jill. While the public saw the happy photos and sold-out arenas, the truth was happening behind closed doors. The emotional distance between him and Jill grew, and Phil started to question everything about his marriage. In 1994, Collins filed for divorce from Jill Tavelman. The divorce wasn't easy, and their daughter Lily was. The child was only 5 years old at the time, and the emotional impact on the family was huge. The media quickly picked up on the story and soon the headlines were all about the more controversial parts of the breakup, especially the claim that Collins ended the marriage with a fax. Even though Phil denied the fax divorce story years later, it stuck around. In his 2016 memoir Not Dead Yet, Collins explained that while faxes were used for legal matters, the idea that he ended his marriage with a single cold message was exaggerated and unfair. The divorce was finalized in 1996, and it cost a lot of money. Collins agreed to pay £17 million in settlement, which was one of the biggest payouts for a celebrity at the time. He never complained about the amount, but it became part of the conversation about his rocky love life. Years later, his daughter Lily Collins wrote a book called Unfiltered in which she talked about her childhood and her relationship with her father. Her father's emotional distance had affected her as a child. She wrote about struggling with self-worth and insecurity. Even though she made it clear she loved her father, her words showed wounds that hadn't fully healed. Despite everything, Collins has never painted himself as a victim. He has often been honest about his mistakes and accepted the consequences of his choices. He is willing to put those regrets into action. Part of what makes his story so deeply human is how he weaves it into his words and songs. His songs, Can't Turn Back the Years, and Both Sides of the Story, give us a glimpse into his heart as he sings about the relationships he couldn't save. Collins' second marriage ended in divorce, which was another devastating event in his life, but he found the strength to pick up the pieces and move on. Let's see where that path led him next, his third marriage and more trouble. By the late 1990s, Phil Collins had already been through 2 painful divorces that left him emotionally and publicly scarred, but in 1999, the legendary singer and drummer took a second chance at love. Collins seemed to have finally found someone who really understood him after years of public heartbreak. This time it was with Swiss-born Oriane Sevi, who had worked as his translator on a tour in 1994. They met professionally, but it didn't take long for their relationship to grow. Collins was in his early 20s when she met Phil, who was more than 20 years her senior. Despite their age difference, they had strong chemistry, and Phil seemed happier and more settled than he had in years. In 1999, they got married, and the ceremony was a success. It was a fresh start for the famous singer, who had spent so much of his life looking for inner peace. Soon after they got married, they had 2 sons, Nicholas in 2001 and Matthew in 2004. Becoming a dad again later in life seemed to give Phil a sense of joy and purpose. He was often seen loving on his kids, and for a while, the Collins family looked like a picture of happiness. But the peace didn't last. Just 7 years after they got married, Phil and Oriane got divorced. It was not only emotionally hard, but it also cost a lot of money. Phil paid £25 million in the settlement, which at the time was the biggest divorce settlement for a celebrity in British legal history. The news was all over the world, and Phil Collins's private pain was splashed across tabloids. Many people thought that this would be the end of their story, but as with so many other things in his life, nothing was simple or final. After the divorce, Orian moved on and eventually got married again, while Collins stayed out of the public eye to focus on his health and recovery. He was quietly dealing with nerve damage, back surgeries, and depression, all of which added to the emotional weight of the divorce. His music slowed down, his stage presence faded, and he seemed to disappear from the public eye. But then, in 2015, almost a decade after their divorce, Phil and Orian got back together, which shocked fans and the media alike. They found their way back to each other despite the painful breakup and huge settlement, and they started living together in Miami with their sons. Sadly, the reunion didn't last. By 2020, their relationship had broken up again, this time in a very public and chaotic way. Orian had secretly married another man, Thomas Bates, while still living in Phil's Miami mansion. When Collins found out, there was a nasty legal battle because Orian wouldn't leave the house, and the situation turned into a dramatic court case that put Collins back in the news, but this time not for his music, but for his heartbreak. After his third marriage ended, Phil Collins found comfort and stability in a quieter relationship. Collins began dating Dana Tyler, a respected American TV journalist, in 2007. They kept their relationship pretty private and low-key for almost a decade, a far cry from the chaos that had surrounded Collins's previous relationships. As time went on and more marriages fell apart, Collins was finally forced to take a hard look at his life and career, examining both the high points and the low points. Career retrospective from Genesis to stardom. Phil Collins went from being a child actor in London to becoming one of the most famous musicians of his time. His first steps into the spotlight had nothing to do with a drum kit or a microphone. When he was 13, he was already performing on the West End stage in London. One of his first roles was as the Artful Dodger in the musical Oliver, and later he played a member of Fagin's gang. At first, acting seemed like the path he was meant to take, but music was what he really loved. As a teenager, Collins played drums in a number of bands and learned the basics of rhythm and stage presence. In 1970, when he was only 19, Collins's life changed forever when he joined Genesis, a relatively unknown progressive rock band. He was hired as the drummer, and his precise timing and crisp fills gave the group new energy. Over the next few years, Genesis, led by Peter Gabriel, became famous for their experimental sound and theatrical live shows. Collins was happy to stay behind the drum kit. Gabriel left the band in 1975, and Genesis had a hard time finding a new lead singer. After months of auditions, Collins reluctantly took the mic. This decision would change both the band's and Collins's future. As lead singer, Collins steered Genesis toward a more radio-friendly sound, and the band's popularity soared. Albums like Duke and Invisible Touch became huge hits, especially in the US, where Genesis went from being a cult progressive band to arena-filling rock stars. But Collins didn't stop wanting to be a rock star. In 1981, he released his first solo album, Face Value, which included the haunting hit, In the Air Tonight. The song became an instant classic, and it wasn't just a hit, it was a raw expression of personal pain after the end of his first marriage. Collins had found his solo voice, and the world was listening. What followed was a decade of amazing success, as Collins delivered hit after hit, including Against All Odds, One More Night, Take Me Home, and Another Day in Paradise. His music won charts around the world, and his emotional. His voice made him one of the most recognizable acts of the time. Collins never stopped connecting with fans, even though some in the rock world thought he was too commercial. He also went into film scoring and songwriting, most notably for Disney. The song, You'll Be in My Heart, from Tarzan, won him an Academy Award, a Golden Globe Award, and a Grammy Award. It also showed that he could write for a new generation of listeners, solidifying his reputation as a versatile artist. By the early 2000s, Phil Collins had sold over 150 million records worldwide between his solo work and his time with Genesis. This made him one of the best-selling artists of all time and something that not many musicians ever managed to do, become the most popular musician in the world as both a solo artist and as a member of a globally popular band. However, Collins admitted in interviews that the non-stop touring, recording, and pressure to stay at the top had taken a toll on him. Not only did his body suffer, but so did his relationships and mental health. Years of touring high-energy shows and the physical demands of drumming finally caught up with him, and when the pain set in, it changed everything. The first big blow came in 2001, when Collins hurt his back badly. Nerves in his upper vertebrae were damaged, making it hard for him to move and feel. The damage was so bad that he couldn't hold drumsticks properly, so he had to wrap tape around his hands to play. That was not only a physical injury, but also an emotional wound for a man whose identity was deeply tied to rhythm and control. As time went on, the condition got worse. Collins had back surgery in 2009 in the hopes that it would relieve some of the pressure on his spine and help him regain function, but the results were mixed. He returned to the stage in short bursts but was clearly in pain. By 2015, he had to go under the knife again, this time for neck surgery to fix damage caused by years of bad posture while drumming. The results were sobering. Not only was the nerve damage permanent, but Collins also developed drop foot, a neuromuscular disorder that makes it hard to lift the front part of the foot. This affects balance and movement, and suddenly even walking without a cane became difficult. Collins, who used to be able to easily switch between a drum kit and a microphone, needed a cane and a chair just to get through a performance. His health problems got worse over time, and he had to quit first from drumming and then from performing. In interviews, he talked about how deeply the decision affected him. For example, he told a news station that not being able to play the drums longer felt like losing a part of his soul. He said, "I'd love to, but I can barely hold a stick with this hand." Jones was in a lot of pain every day, and the mental weight that came with it was too. He had always been a driven artist who put everything he had into every note, but now the thing he loved was hurting him. Most had become the thing that hurt him the most for many people who saw him. Unable to move while sitting on stage during his last Genesis tour in 2021 and 2022. Play while clearly sick was upsetting, but for Collins it was about. His main goal was to say goodbye on his own terms, not because he was proud. Music sounded different, and the health situation sped up a wave of. Collins could no longer hide behind drum kits and world trips to avoid thinking about himself. More openly about his life, his choices, and his relationships in interviews with The Standard and AOL, among others. He talked about how his injuries had slowed him down not only physically, but also mentally and emotionally. He admitted that the forced stillness made him face regrets he had long buried under the noise of fame. Most recently, Phil Collins opened up about his life in a way he had never done before and made a shocking confession about the true love of his life. Phil Collins, the singer of some of the most famous songs of the 1980s and 1990s, has always kept his emotions close to his chest. But in an honest interview with Mojo in February 2025, at the age of 74, he took off all the layers and talked about his health problems, career regrets, and a deep emotional truth. Collins told the truth that fans had long known but had never heard so clearly: "I'm very sick." He didn't sugarcoat it. It was the spinal injury from 2007, the nerve damage, the neck surgery in 2015, and the drop foot. It wasn't self-pity, he just said it. Collins's health had been getting worse for years, ever since he hurt his back in 2007 and couldn't play the drums properly. He had to tape drumsticks to his hands just to get through performances. But by March 2022, when he finished his final Genesis tour, he was done. He didn't walk off the stage feeling triumphant. He knew it would probably be the last time. "If I can't do what I did as well, I'd rather relax," he told People magazine. The words hurt. It was more than just physical for Collins, whose life was built on rhythm and motion. He told CFJCtoday.com with a bittersweet smile, "I've used up my air miles." He wasn't being mean, He was just tired after decades of putting his soul into every song, tour, and lost love. He said he didn't want to make new music anymore. "I'm not looking to record again," he added, "not because I don't care, because I've said what I needed to say." He has long been known for being honest about his feelings in his music. In an honest interview with Playboy, he said, "I've never been afraid to sing about heartbreak. I've always been fine with being vulnerable." He also said, "A lot of my solo music came from the breakup of my first marriage. I couldn't not write about it." His marriage to Andrea Bertorelli did more than break his heart, it shaped his career. In an interview with The Guardian, Collins made one of his most shocking admissions: "My biggest regret is that I owe my whole solo career to my first divorce. If Andrea hadn't left me in 1979, we wouldn't be here." This moment of honesty shows the emotional paradox at the heart of Collins's success. His biggest artistic breakthroughs came from personal tragedy, and when he looked back on all of his albums, tours, and awards in 2025, he didn't talk about his fame. He talked about Andrea, even though they had been divorced for more than 40 years. It wasn't until the very end of the interview that Collins finally said what he had never said in public before: "Andrea, you are the love of my life." Fans were shocked, not because Andrea was a stranger, she had been the subject of many songs, but because Collins had finally said it: she was the one, the woman he loved more than anyone else. Their story was complicated. They met in drama class as teens, lost touch, and then got back together in Vancouver years later. They got married in 1975 and had 2 kids together, Simon and Joelle, whom Collins adopted. But by 1980, their marriage had fallen apart because of fame and distance. It left a wound that would become a soundtrack song. Songs like "If Leaving Me Is Easy Please Don't Ask" and "In the Air Tonight" carried the pain of that breakup. Collins never said for sure that these songs were about Andrea, but the tone of the timeline and later admissions made it clear that his art was in many ways a long love letter to the woman he couldn't hold on to. Now that he has reached the end of his job and his body's limits, he's finally calling that love out in a public way. This confession isn't just a romantic act, it's the last piece of emotional closure in a life filled with rhythm, heartbreak, and brutal honesty. For decades, Collins' music showed fans the most vulnerable side of himself. Now that he's older and can't hide anything, he's giving them something even rarer, a raw reflection. Phil Collins doesn't need another album or another tour, his legacy is set. For generations, music has helped people get over breakups, deaths, and reconciliations. But maybe his most powerful statement wasn't in a song, but in a quiet moment of truth. The woman who caused him pain was also the one who held his heart as he sang, "Take a Look at Me Now." And we see a man who dared to love loudly, harm deeply, and share it all with the sector. And in his final confessions we listen the softest, truest echo of who he surely is. Allows check what legacy this high-quality man left behind, a legacy no longer just of chart-topping hits but of vulnerability, resilience, and a lifetime poured into each word he ever sang. Legacy of Phil Collins. Phil Collins's career is one of the maximum high quality in cutting-edge song history as both the drummer and lead vocalist for Genesis and a highly successful solo artist. Collins carried out what only a few musicians ever have. He had become a household name in 2 separate arenas over the span of 5 decades. His tune reached across generations and genres, blending rock, pop, and soul into something unmistakably his own. With over 150 million data sold worldwide, Phil Collins belongs to an elite magnificence of worldwide superstars. His solo albums like Face Price, No Jacket Required, and But Seriously introduced hit after hit, from In the Air Tonight to In Opposition to All Odds to Every Other Day in Paradise. Every music wasn't just a melody, it was an emotional experience. Collins became his non-public heartbreaks and demanding situations into relatable stories, and lovers across the world connected with his uncooked honesty. However, Collins wasn't only a singer, he became a musician's musician. His drumming fashion, especially with Genesis, was complicated, dynamic, and effective. He pioneered techniques like the gated reverb drum sound, which became a defining function of 80s pop and rock. Even when he stepped out from behind the drum kit to take middle level, the rhythm never left him. Each beat of his track felt intentional, pulsing with emotion past track charts and Grammys. Collins Left a deep cultural footprint his paintings has regarded in film soundtracks, TV suggests and sports occasions. Within the Air Tonight alone has turned out to be one of the maximum immediately recognizable songs ever recorded. Its iconic drum ruin forever etched into popular culture, and possibly just as powerfully Bill Collins taught us that vulnerability wasn't weakness. He opened up about his non-public battles, his divorces, his addiction, his fitness struggles, and he didn't disguise from them as an alternative. He grew to become ache into poetry. He confirmed that even at the peak of fame, it become K to fall to experience and to hold going has have an effect on stretches some distance beyond his personal tune. Infinite artists from Adele to Questlove cite him as an thought. His drumming, songwriting and emotional authenticity have helped shape the sound of contemporary pop and rock. Although his fitness may have silenced his drums, Phil Collins's legacy keeps to echo through each heartfelt lyric, and every fan nevertheless moved by using his tune. He wasn't just a performer, he changed into a storyteller, a craftsman and a soul who dared to feel out loud, and that mainly is what will endure. What are your thoughts on Phil Collins's love life and his heartfelt confession so late in lifestyles? Do you watched some loves by no means simply fade? Share your mind within the feedback. We might like to listen what you observed.